Hi there, I'm Josh, and today we're talking about the Core i7-3770 in 2024, and I wanted to say a happy 2024 to you. I know it's been a little bit, but I plan to do more videos now that things are a little bit smoother, and now that I have a lot more to actually make content on. Thank you so much for 1,700 subscribers. Every single time you subscribe, it makes my dream of becoming a YouTuber come true, and I really appreciate each and every one of you that has continued to support me through the years. But without any further ado, let's talk about the i7-3770 in 2024. The Core i7-3770 launched in Q2 of 2012 with 4 cores and 8 threads, a max turbo frequency of 3.9 GHz, and a base frequency of 3.4 GHz. It has a TDP of 77 watts, and the recommended customer price back in 2012 was $305, and I picked up this PC that has everything, including RAM, motherboard, and everything else, for $50. What I have it paired with today is 16 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM and an RTX 2060. Now, I wouldn't recommend an RTX 2060, but the reason why I chose to do so is because I wanted to give this CPU as much power as it needed in order to show you how good this CPU is when it's pushed to its absolute limits. So let's hop into the benchmarks. Up first is the finals at 1080p with the high settings. We saw an average frame rate of 57 FPS, a 1% low of 31, and a 0.1% low of 6. There was a lot of moments in this game where we hit 60 frames per second, so I would consider this to be playable, and I wouldn't recommend dropping the settings down just because this game is already going to be CPU bottlenecked with an RTX 2060. But the 0.1% low didn't happen very often, as showcased by the 1% low frame rate. There wasn't much jitter to speak of, so I would consider this game to be playable. Apex Legends at 1080p with a medium and high mixture ran with an average frame rate of 132 frames per second, a 1% low of 67, and a 0.1% low of 13. So when I see a 1% low above 60, I have a feeling that this is going to be very good. And the 0.1% low wasn't very common, obviously, because that's a 0.1% low frame rate, and the 1% low shows that it didn't jitter too much. Baldur's Gate 3 at 1080p with a mixture of high and ultra settings ran with an average frame rate of 65 frames per second, a 1% low of 34, and a 0.1% low of 8. So, again, a pretty good showing throughout. This game is intensive in some scenes, so it's impressive to see it running with an average frame rate of 65 frames per second, especially as I was walking around more demanding areas. We were still seeing within 50 to 60 frames per second. Lethal Company next, at whatever settings it gives you, because you can't change anything, ran with an average frame rate of 102 FPS, a 1% low of 77, and a 0.1% low of 51. So this game had no issues whatsoever. Even the 0.1% low frame rate was really good. You can run Lethal Company on anything and it'll be fine. So I was glad to see that it ran as well as it did on this now 12-year-old CPU. Counter-Strike 2 at 1080p with the high preset ran with an average frame rate of 111 frames per second, which was not a bad showing at all. I would consider that enough to be competitively playable, even if there were moments when it went down to 90. I think that because of how demanding Counter-Strike 2 is now, anything above 100 is good enough. So I would consider this to be playable, and once again, I would not recommend dropping the settings below high because you're just going to see a bottleneck on the CPU. And last but not least, Modern Warfare 3 at 1080p with the Ultra preset ran with an average frame rate of 66 frames per second, a 1% low of 11, and a 0.1% low of 7. So this game was the one that really took the most hits in terms of CPU performance and was not fantastic to look at while playing. But with that said, the average frame rate was 66. I do think that the jitter does make this game quite a bit harder to play than other games on this list. So I was really surprised by this CPU and how well it ran, considering it is 12 years old now. But it's still hanging in there, and I would say if you have a 1650 Super, 1660 Ti, anything in that range, you're still going to have no problems playing games with the i7-3770. But if you're looking to upgrade, I think a CPU would be smart before upgrading another GPU, because the 2060 was too much for this CPU. But it's still a pretty good fighter, I'm not going to lie. With 4 cores and 8 threads, it definitely wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and I was impressed. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you liked it, like, subscribe, do what you usually do, and as always, buy yourself something nice.